Welcome everyone to the Microsoft 365 Community Conference Sponsor Webinar Series. I'm Ella Fernandez, Head of Connections at BTechly, and today we're joined by our sponsor, CoreView. In this session, we'll be exploring the anatomy of Microsoft 365 attack. But before we get started, just a few quick reminders. To join the live Q&A, you'll need to register for the webinar. If you haven't registered, simply scan the QR code on the screen or visit btechly.com, select today's session, and enter your business email address. Once you're registered, our team will add you to the calendar invite, which includes a link to join the Q&A chat at the end of the session. Please note the Q&A is not live streamed. Join us at the Microsoft 365 Community Conference this April 21st to 23rd in Orlando. Register now by scanning the QR code on your screen or head to nextgen365events.com. Use the discount code SAVE150 to get $150 off on your registration. Apply for the Microsoft 365 Community Grant Program, built to help small businesses and nonprofits to accelerate their AI journey with hands-on learning, expert guidance, and financial support to attend #M365Con26. Scan the QR code on the screen or visit change3e.com/grants. And of course, please like, subscribe, and follow both BTechly and the Microsoft 365 Community Conference. Without further ado, let's enjoy today's learning session.
Hey guys, it's Rob Edmondson here. I hope you're well. I'm just going to share my screen so we can get started together. Today, we're going to be covering the anatomy of a Microsoft 365 attack, how attackers compromise, attack, and take control of Microsoft 365 tenants. My name is Rob Edmondson, and I'm the Senior Director of Product Marketing and Principal Technologist here at CoreView. I've been with the organization for coming up to 3 years, and during that time, I have had my mind absolutely blown by the real story behind Microsoft 365 attacks and breaches. For a bit of context, CoreView is a vendor dedicated to the Microsoft 365 space. Now, I don't want to talk too much about CoreView at the front end of this learning session because it's all about sharing information, not talking about this company, but I just want to give you a bit of context about where our expertise comes from. It is not unusual for us to get called in after someone's Microsoft 365 tenant, their environment has been compromised, after they've experienced a breach they were not expecting to experience. We will often get called in alongside colleagues of ours at Microsoft to find out what happened and to see if what we can do can help and just in general to consult. Because of this, we've gained a lot of experience over the last few years understanding some of the unbelievable gaps that exist in Microsoft 365 environments and understanding a bit more of the anatomy of what goes on from the beginning of the breach right through to its conclusion. And you can see here on the screen, I've got 6 components up here. These map very generally to how the anatomy of a breach tends to work anyway, but there's a little bit of a twist in terms of the Microsoft environment here. First, there's the reconnaissance element. This is just generally searching for information. Today, we're not going to go into this because in reality, the reconnaissance element is the same for all kinds of breaches. So I don't want to bore you by going through that. Where we're going to focus is on the entry. How do people get into a Microsoft 365 tenant and compromise it? How do they elevate their access and privileges so that they have the power they need? Once they have that power, how do they stay in the environment and evade detection? How do they ensure that even if they get kicked out of the environment, they can still get back in and continue their breach? And finally, the most important part I think here is what we call total tenant takeover. This is where the entire tenant gets taken over by the cyber criminal. It might sound like a sort of cheesy marketing phrase, but some of the stories I'm going to share with you, I think will really bring this to life. It is deeply alarming how often this happens. just to give you a very high-level general statement, I have been involved in meetings with very significant organizations where that term isn't inappropriate, where their entire tenant was taken over because they worked through this chain that I've got in front of you. The consequences to them were pretty astonishing. And so all the better for us to educate ourselves now in this safe environment rather than having to learn the hard way about how this happens. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off at the entry. Over on the left, this is our cyber criminal. All cyber criminals seem to wear hoodies or wear masks. So just an MO there. That's the first thing you can take away from this. Is you ever see someone wearing a hoodie or a strange hat or a mask, it's very likely they're a cyber criminal. Over on the right is your Microsoft 365 tenant. So how do they get in? Let's just cover the basic stuff that we already know. They can use brute forcing with a password spray. They can use normal email attacks. Email's wonderful because you have to have email. It allows anyone to send attacks right into the inboxes of your day-to-day business staff. Everyone knows about this stuff. So we've all been addressing this stuff for over a decade. I'm not here to bore you with this. I suspect all of you will have reasonably good defenses in place to try and deal with these things. What I want to do is to introduce new information that explains why, despite the fact that as an industry we do reasonably well here, there are still gaps. The first one of these is an OAuth consent phishing attack. I'm going to cover this in more detail on the next slide, but suffice to say this is a very clever form of phishing which allows an adversary to get access to your environment. Once they are able to create this application, it gives them privileged access to Entra ID. As we all know, Entra is the crown jewels to your cloud. So I'm going to walk you through how that attack works in a minute, but it's very, very interesting and definitely something you want to be conscious of. We also need to be aware that because of the nature of Microsoft 365, the collaborative nature of the environment means that quite often you've got third parties, external users, guest users, and unknown users in shared collaboration spaces. For example, I could be hosting this session we're having right now in a Teams webinar, right? And you can all attend in my tenants. I would invite you all, you would attend, and you get access to a chat by being there. In many cases, that could lead to you being in part of different collaboration spaces. Maybe some of you come and do some work with me in my organization and you become guest users. And now you're in this group, you're in this environment, you've got access to this SharePoint site. There's this interesting phenomenon with Microsoft 365 because although on the one hand, it is an extraordinarily sensitive part of your cloud because Entra's there, it's your Active Directory on steroids in the cloud. At the same time as having your directory, you also have collaboration. These are two things that, frankly, would never belong together in a normal circumstance. If any of you have been involved in Active Directory, I remember years ago I was consulting with many large organizations, and whenever we talk with them about their security strategy, Active Directory would be in the basement behind a demilitarized zone, completely segmented away from anything that could act as a threat to it. Today in 2026, our new Active Directory Entra is in the cloud in Microsoft 365, right next to collaboration spaces that are exposed to the internet. So all that is to say, we need to be aware that you've got unknown users who are accessing your collaboration spaces, and the cyber criminal could attack them and get access to their accounts. And then by default, they're one step closer to your tenants. But by far the biggest issue here is all of the configurations that exist in your Microsoft tenant. Misconfigurations can make it easy for cyber criminals to get in. In Entra, you can have misconfigured access policies. In Defender, you can have weakened security policies. Weak endpoint profiles in Intune. Purview could allow data leakage gaps, which could make breaches easy. Exchange can allow for mail forwarding, allowing cyber criminals to get insights into the day-to-day operations of your businesses. And like I said, Teams and SharePoint are designed to be collaborative. All of these configurations across these services are frequently misconfigured in breaches that we get called into. The real issue for these businesses is they think, well, why didn't we know? And the reason is that Microsoft 365 actually doesn't alert you when your configurations are out of line, or if someone's accidentally changed them to a dangerous position, or if they're just there because you never configured them properly and now they're weak. So this creates a huge extra source of data exposure. Yes, cyber criminals can do lots of clever things to try and force their way in, but it may well be that your tenant actually already has open doors because you've not been able to harden your tenant against attacks. When we talk about hardening, we think about, for example, endpoints, right? If you were going to deploy a new endpoint to a new employee, you would harden it before you give it to them. This is best practices. When it comes to our Microsoft tenants, we don't harden them before we set them up to be used. And that's just the reality. And people are now trying to do this retroactively. So in terms of entry, it's all of the stuff on the screen. Now, let's talk about that third-party app attack. This uses Entra applications, and this is what we call an OAuth consent phishing attack. And it goes like this, okay? So I want you to imagine that an attacker gets access to a non-admin account, and they go in and they can create an app with some basic permissions. Because they don't have an admin account, the application they create in your environment is going to have very limited permissions. But even those permissions can allow the attacker to see what applications your business uses. Okay, so I want you to imagine I've got a really low level account, it's not that powerful. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this app, and it's going to show me all the apps that your team uses day to day. And I see that you use Hugo, which is like a product management application. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a fake Hugo application, and I am going to perform a phishing attack on you using this. Now, this is a really good spear phishing attack because I know the people in the business who use this app, so I can target them specifically with emails talking about the need to update or something like this that could trick them into clicking accept on this Hugo app. The thing is, I've given it all of these extra permissions. So the service principal associated with the app now comes with powerful admin permissions to read, write directory, read, write files, read, write groups, read, write apps, read, write emails. And now it's, if you click accept, you have given me admin permission inside of your tenant. Now, in terms of the anatomy of a Microsoft 365 tenant attack, I've just taken you from entry all the way to total control. So I just wanted to share that scenario because many of us aren't looking for these OAuth consent phishing attacks. We really need to have deep visibility of any new Entra application that appears in your tenant, any of them. The moment a new Entra app gets created, you must be alerted. You must have visibility into the permissions it's requesting, and you must have a workflow in your team to quickly ask, wait a second, is this dangerous? Is this really sanctioned? Now, regardless of whether someone actually does that consent phishing or whether they get in using the techniques we talked about earlier, if it's weakened configuration or whatever, once they're in, this is where the magic really starts. Because getting into an environment is, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's really not the goal. The goal is that once I'm in, I need to get admin privileges. That OAuth consent phishing attack would bypass that for the cyber criminal, but it's not often that easy. So how would they do this? Firstly, reconnaissance. Now, normally you think of reconnaissance as being at the beginning of the attack chain, but the amazing thing is once I'm in the tenant, if I've got control of a user account, I have access to so much great information. Just the other day, I was using Copilot in our own organization to search for things and information about upcoming meetings. I was blown away by the amount of detail that it can centralize. It can search across everything I've got access to and quickly give me information. So if I'm a cyber criminal, I've compromised your account, why am I going to go digging around trying to find data when I can just ask Copilot to tell me what's going on? Then I've also got all of those SharePoint and Teams environments I've got access to. I've got the ability to send emails internally. I can check out the org chart. I can look at different social announcements that are going on. And this gives me a wonderful internal view with which to do further internal phishing and manipulation. And really what I'm going to be doing is looking for the small select group of people in the business who are likely to have admin privileges. Engineers, IT teams, whatever. Maybe I'll go after your dev or test environment if you have a dev or test tenant, like what happened in the Midnight Blizzard attack. That's where Microsoft was compromised using Entra apps and they went for the dev and test environment. So maybe I'll try and go after that. Maybe I'll go after the actual production environment. The key thing is if I can target someone who's got admin privileges and I can get them to fall for my tricks, I can very quickly elevate to the admin level. And this is where I can go from elevation part 1 to total elevation, because I can now create privileged apps inside of your tenant and assign them extreme levels of privilege. You know, one of the awesome things about this from a cyber criminal's perspective is if you kick me out of the tenant now, I can set it up so that Entra app can be accessed externally with a pair of credentials. So even if you kick me out at this stage, as long as I've made a highly privileged Entra app and you don't have good visibility of those apps, you might think we got him, we kicked him out, thank goodness, let's begin reviewing what's going on. And I've already got back in with privileges via an Entra application. I can also go and alter critical configurations. This is a fantastic way to ensure that I can get back in and also to give myself further access in your tenants. And there's PowerShell execution as well. There are lots of choices here. The key thing is that once I have admin privileges, I am able to do a lot of really cool stuff. And you know what's deeply worrying? All the things I've listed here, most businesses that we go into after they've had a breach, they did not have visibility of these things. And it was often these things that allowed the attacker to proceed. The number of tier 1 financial institutions, of huge government agencies, of global brands that have been compromised because of weak or tampered configurations in their Microsoft tenant is mind-blowing. It truly is mind-blowing. As well as that, the Entra apps element is huge as well. I could, again, tier 1 financial organizations where that's been the critical component is it's a real thing. So once I'm able to do these things, it's not hard for me to elevate right to the top of the stack. And even if all of that fails, I can still go and buy credentials on the dark web. This is from a Digital Shadows report. They found that you could go on the dark web, you could buy personal credit card details for just $60. And if you wanted to buy a domain admin account, this is for on-premise Active Directory, it would cost you $120,000. Now, that's a lot of money, right? But if you think about the damage you can cause to a big business with domain admin privileges, it's actually pretty good value for money. So I wonder how much it might cost to get access to a global admin account for a business, for your business, for my business. What about an Intune admin account? Just the other day, there was a global medical company that was compromised, Stryker. Their Intune admin portal was critical to the attack, managed to wipe all of their devices globally. I think there was 200,000 devices that were wiped. I'm not sure if it's actually all of them, but 200,000 seems to be a large number, probably large volume of them. And that was all done by legitimate access to the Intune admin panel. There was no malware or ransomware. This was just using the admin panel available in Microsoft 365. So of course I'm going to pay a lot of money for a powerful admin account. And if my admin accounts or your admin accounts are for sale on the dark web, even if the cyber criminal is struggling, they can still get in. Now, very quickly, we need to talk about Microsoft 365 privileges and why they are so excessive and dangerous. Recently, Microsoft reported that 63% of the tenants they investigate after an incident are failing on the principle of least privilege. That's a pretty astonishing number. But the real question we've got to ask is why? Why Microsoft? Why is this happening? When you ask this question, actually, the situation really opens up. So to explain this, I want to use the analogy of an apartment block. I'm sure many people here live in apartments. I want you to imagine that you're going apartment shopping. Okay, it's time to move, and someone's showing you a beautiful apartment. It's got everything you need, but it costs $3,000 a month. And you're thinking, can we really afford this? And then I appear and I say, hey, I'm going to rent you the same apartment building for $500 a month. And you're thinking, no way, this is a dream come true. But there's a catch. And the catch is that the apartments are actually, all of their doors are open. All of them. My front door is open, your front door is open. We can all get into each other's apartments. And there is no way to put new doors on. So everyone lives effectively in a shared space. Yes, you've got your own rooms, but anyone can come at any time, steal your stuff, and you can do the same to theirs. Would you move in? Most people would say no. Now, obviously, you might be thinking, but I'll pay to get the apartment door fixed. But in this situation, you can't do it, okay? So $500 a month, but you are left with this huge shared space. Most people won't do it. You know why? The reason is because we value privacy on a personal level. I want to know that, yes, we're in a shared building, but I have a segmented environment, which is my own space for me. Here's the thing. When you live in a Microsoft 365 tenant, there are no boundaries. Admins get tenant-wide access based on the service they have access to. So for example, if I give you an Exchange admin account for Exchange email in my Microsoft tenant, you are going to be able to manage all the mailboxes in that tenant. I can't give you an Exchange admin account that only has the mailboxes for this small group of people. So by default, your Exchange access is tenant-wide. The privilege is unbelievably high. Now, why am I going on about this? Because when we talk about the anatomy of a Microsoft 365 breach, this is critical. The moment an administrator is compromised, the ability to elevate privileges explodes because the admin account that all your administrators have access to have vast blast radiuses. And so the anatomy, the kill chain, is surprisingly short. The moment someone gets administrative access, they basically get access to the whole tenant very quickly. We need to find a way to slow this down and to segment things, because this is your most privileged environment. It has Entra, Intune, Defender, Purview, SharePoint, Teams, Exchange, etc. These are unbelievably powerful tools. And yet there's no serious controls to enforce least privilege. Now look, Microsoft does have administrative units, but you can only segment by identities and devices. A whole bunch of other use cases are absent and missing, meaning that a whole bunch of your tenant is still excessively privileged with huge blast radiuses. All of that is very important, because the truth is, if you want to reduce the likelihood of total tenant compromise, you need to find a way to change that privilege situation. You need to change that status quo so administrators don't simply have normal privileged accounts. They have segmented access that is truly constrained. Meaning if someone compromises them, they only get access to a few devices or a few mailboxes, not the whole tenant. The next component here is really important as well, because once I'm in and I've got my privileges, I want to make sure that if you kick me out, I can get back in. And I have so many ways that I can do this. Number one, I can go and create more exposed environments, more collaboration environments, SharePoint sites, Teams, chats, and places where I can have external access easily. I'm absolutely going to set up mail forwarding for any VIP users in the tenants. And it's really easy for me to do this and to obscure it from the users themselves. And then I'm going to get all of your emails and all of your communications, making it extraordinarily easy for me to determine when the right time is for me to attack and what information to use in the attack to create a tailored spear phishing attack using information from your emails. I'm going to create Entra apps. I'm going to create and approve malicious OAuth apps that look legitimate, like the Hugo one, right? So now I'm in your tenant, I've got privileges. I'm going to look up all of the applications you guys are using. I'm going to create malicious versions of them inside of your tenant. Quite hard for you to detect those unless you've got really granular visibility of Entra apps. I'll continue to alter configurations to make it easy for me to get back in, create more applications inside the tenant, and also edit audit logs so that you can't see what I'm doing. This is the thing, the moment you get serious privileged access, all of this becomes possible, and I can use all of it to obscure the attack. In terms of the configuration tampering thing, by the way, this is so common. I know I mentioned it a moment ago, but let me just give you some of the data as well as the anecdotes that I shared with you. This is from Cybersecurity HQ in the first half of 2025. Configuration drift and tampering was rated as the #1 cloud security threat. Microsoft themselves in May of 2024, I think it's 2024, it might have been 2025, they detected 176,000 instances of configuration tampering in just 1 month. And you might be thinking, wait a second, if Microsoft can detect this, then why would we need another tool? Well, Microsoft is actually detecting this in non-365 environments. So Microsoft hasn't been able to detect configuration tampering in Microsoft 365. They are releasing some basic capabilities right now, but they're very immature. But this detection they were doing was in other environments. Shame they can't do it in their own tenants. I wonder why? Probably because Microsoft 365 is so complicated. Sophos XOps detected a 79% increase in tampering of Defender across a 2-year period when they investigated breaches. Picus, the attack simulation vendor, they looked at all of the MITRE attack techniques being used in attacks that they studied. So the MITRE attack techniques have like, I think, 250 different techniques that are used by cybercriminals. And they identified T1562, which is impaired defenses, was in the top 1% of attack techniques being used. So this shot right to the top of common and preferred attacks by cybercriminals, basically going in and making your defenses not work. And the way you do this is by changing the configurations, turning off the defenses, etc. Microsoft themselves as well, in their own documentation, highlight that if Entra gets misconfigured or Intune is misconfigured, it massively increases attack efficacy. In the case of Entra, ransomware can be 40% more effective if you only misconfigure Entra. This doesn't even refer to like Defender misconfigurations, which would increase that number further. And Intune device compromise goes up by 70% if you can misconfigure Intune. And of course, that happens all the time. Microsoft actually rolled out an update last year, which accidentally deleted the device compliance profiles of a whole load of their customers, custom profiles their customers had spent ages configuring. And Microsoft update deleted it. Microsoft didn't even realize they'd done this until some of their customers noticed. So actually having visibility of your Intune configurations and whether they've been changed, super critical to making sure that your security posture is in place. All of this, all of the excessive privilege, the tampering of configurations, the creation of apps, all of it leads up to one thing, which I have seen far too many times. It's what we call total tenant takeover. So here is an administrator. They're looking at this huge wall of configurations. They're thinking, oh my gosh, how many configurations do we have? And how do I make sure that they're properly configured? You see, your team will have spent years carefully configuring your Microsoft 365 tenants. And that can be stolen from you in an instant. And when that happens, the question is, how will you get that configuration state back? So I want to tell you a story here about a ransomed tenant that we were involved in. All I'm going to say is this was a government agency. I'm not going to say which country. I'm not going to go into any more details than that. A very big, surprisingly big government agency lost control of their tenants after an attack, and they were held to ransom. Now, to be very clear, I am not talking about ransomware. I am talking about cyber criminals going in and following the techniques that we talked about, taking over the entire tenant to the point they had full privileges, global admin privileges, and using those privileges to kick all the users out of the tenant using Entra and all the relevant techniques. And then they would go and communicate to the business and say, you can have this environment back if you pay us X amount of money. In this situation, the organization thought, well, this is awful, but this is why we did all of our data backup. This is why we backed up all of our data. And we have all of these plans that we've had in place for situations like this. So they thought, let's re-provision a new tenant. Let's get the data back in there. Instantly, they realized the data backup wasn't working. And that's when it became clear, actually, they should probably configure the environment to try and get it back to where it was. This is when they realized, we don't even know what our configuration state was. We never had it documented. This was a huge organization with hundreds of thousands of unique configurations across all of their services. They realized it would take them 3.5 weeks, once they basically understood what had happened, to get a view of what their configuration should be and to do the full reconfiguration to a point where they would have confidence. That was their estimation. Just to be clear, this would mean it would be 3.5 weeks before they could have confidence that they could put their users back into their environment. As they began the reconfiguration process, they realized the data backup still wasn't working. And it didn't work until the configurations were similar enough to where they had been before. It turns out that the data backup wasn't able to function unless the configurations were back to where they were. All of this highlights a very key lesson that we see people learning all the time, and it's a big part of the message that we go and spread as we go and meet these businesses. It is not enough to back up your data. You also have to back up your tenant configurations. The way we explain this is by looking at a glass of water. So your Microsoft tenant is both the water inside of the glass is the data, and the glass itself. That's the tenant, which is made up of configurations. Configuration tampering means that both are under threat during cyber incidents. So if I take your glass of water and throw the water on the floor, you're going to be annoyed with me, but because you have your data backed up, you can pour the water back into the glass and you can get going again because I didn't break the glass, okay? So you're fine. Here's the issue. During incidents, I might take the glass and smash it on the floor. I might chip certain parts out of it. I might change configuration so much that the glass loses its integrity. So now if you try and pour your water back in, it's going to leak, it's not going to work. You don't have a secure environment to put the data into. This is why it's critical that you back up both the water and the glass. You need to back up both the data and the configurations of the environment, because in the anatomy of a Microsoft 365 attack, both of these are under threat. And your ability to survive that attack depends on having both of these backed up and visibility of both. And with that, that's really the climax of the anatomy of the attack. Ultimately, the goal of cyber criminals is to get as much power as possible. And when they decide to cause damage, it could well be that you lose the very tenants that you rely on every single day. So just very quickly as we wrap up, to give you a high-level view, CoreView is dedicated to Microsoft 365 tenant resilience. We have built our product to fill in these gaps. And just very quickly, because I don't want to labor talking about CoreView, but it'll just hopefully give you a bit of extra illumination as we wrap up our session. CoreView Microsoft 365 tenant resilience enables you to anticipate, withstand, and recover from attacks in Microsoft 365 and Entra. And there are basically 5 components. Number 1, we enable you to harden your tenants against attacks. This means on day 1, you can see all the configurations that are out of place in the tenant, and you can harden the tenant against attacks by rolling out secure configuration. This means that initial compromise of your tenant is far less likely. Once someone gets into the environment, we give you the ability to create segmented tenants. So this means I can give each administrator very small levels of access. So if they get compromised, what they actually have is so small that the cyber criminal can't elevate their privileges as easily as they want to. If a cyber criminal does somehow get privileged access though, and they go and try and change configurations, we can detect configuration tampering. We actually monitor for about 8,000 different configuration details across the environment, including Entra, Intune, Purview, SharePoint, Defender, Teams, Exchange, Admin Center, all of the key services we monitor 8,000 different details across them for changes. So you get alerted and you can determine, was that a legitimate change or was it tampering? After an incident, we give the ability to recover your tenant, to detect who's changed which configurations, and to roll back your tenant configurations to the ideal state. And finally, we give you the ability to build operational resilience, to automate at scale, to offload tasks to AI. The whole point here is that often gaps in your Microsoft tenant, gaps in your configuration, usually are the result of your team being burnt out by excess demand. There's spikes in demand that come from attacks, from audits, from consolidation projects, from just day-to-day chaos, right? And when those spikes in demand come, you often are left with gaps. Users don't get offboarded, access reviews aren't done, misconfigurations happen. And then what happens is the demand goes down, but those security issues remain, and it makes it easier for you to be compromised. That's why it's so important you don't just deal with the security issues, you've got to deal with that operational issue too. Make it possible for your team to survive those huge peaks in demand without security issues occurring. You can see Microsoft here have very kindly given us this warm endorsement by saying, by deploying CoreView, enterprise gain robust tenant resilience and compliance solutions that strengthen their security posture. And with that, I'll say thank you very much for learning with me. And I'm going to pass the ball back over to Ella.
Uh-oh. Hey, can you guys hear me? I think my camera is frozen here.
Yeah.
All right. Give me 2 minutes. I'll be back real quick, but let me see if I could fix this thing. Sorry
Okay.
about
No
that.
problem. No, you're good. No worries.
All right. Well, let me try to stay on here, and then I'll try to fix that camera later on. Well, Rob, that was such an amazing and wonderful session. To everyone joining us on the live stream, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for joining us. We're wrapping it up shortly. So we invite you to visit CoreView at the Microsoft 365 conference at booth 401 to rub elbow with Rob, and to answer questions, and he'll be there answering any questions you might have, discuss stuff with you. And if you don't have your conference pass yet for the Microsoft 365 conference, register now by scanning the QR code on your screen, or go to nextgen365events.com. Use code SAVE150 to save 150 on your registration pass. Apply for the Microsoft 365 Community Grant Program by scanning the QR code on your screen, or visit change3e.com/grants. This is built to support small businesses and nonprofit with hands-on learning, expert guidance, and financial assistance for the Microsoft 365 Community Conference. If you'd like to participate in the live Q&A with Rob, please be sure that you use the calendar invite that we sent you on that link on the call. And thank you so much, everyone. Bye for now.